And my inhaler.
Yeah.
We are live.
I did find it. That's why I went back into the house. Where was it? It was underneath the sofa. Thank God.
Yo, guys, we're live.
Oh.
What you doing?
You ready?
Yeah. I can move. Yeah, that's good. Assalamu alaikum. We'll be starting our Surah Yasin class. We start every week Thursday at 7 p.m. And tonight we're doing ayats 28 to 35 of Surah Yasin. And the topics that will be covered are divine wrath and shukr. We'll be ending the stream promptly at 7:45. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and we'll do our best to get to them. But if not, we'll address them first thing next week. With the time switch now, we will be praying Maghrib right after for everyone in the room. And inshallah, without further ado, here's Ustadh Omair.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير نويت التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today we'll be going over Ayat 28 to 35 as Brother Mujib pointed out. I believe this is our 5th or 6th session inshallah out of 12. We are almost halfway through Surah Yasin in terms of the number of ayat, just about there. The topics for today are primarily talking about the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is going to be continuing from the previous story that we mentioned about the people of the village. And then for the second half of the ayat, we'll be transitioning to a new topic, which is about an introduction to some of the signs of Allah, and then also shukr, thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So first of all, just a quick recap. For those of you who weren't able to join us for the past few weeks, we spent the last 2 weeks speaking about ayat 13 to 27, which is in the standard Mus'haf, it's page 441, or the second full page of Surah Yasin, in which we spoke about the example or the parable of the village, which is the story of a people of a village to which 2 messengers were sent, and then a 3rd messenger was sent, and then the people argued with the messengers, and then a man came to tell his people to follow the messengers, and then he was killed. And the last thing that we covered from that, the parable, was the man was entered into Jannah, and he, even in the state of being in Jannah, remembered his people, and he said, oh, if only my people had listened, and if only my people knew what I was honored with. And we mentioned over the course of the last 2 weeks that according to many of the scholars of tafsir, this village is the village of Antioch, which is near the border of Turkey and of modern-day Turkey and Syria, and the messengers that were sent to this village were actually disciples of the Christ alayhi salam, who were sent by Isa alayhi salam himself to preach the religion of Isa alayhi salam to these people. So today we kind of have not exactly a continuation of the direct story, but more of like a prologue to the story, if you will, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now speaking from His perspective again, and not describing the events that happened there, but speaking from His perspective, Allah kind of fills in the story, gives us some insights and kind of summarizes everything and wraps it up. So starting with ayah number 28, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَى قَوْمِهِ مِن بَعْدِهِ مِن جُنْدٍ مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ وَمَا كُنَّا مُنزِلِينَ. And a rough translation of this ayah would be, we did not send upon his people after him any sort of army or soldiers from the sky. So we didn't send an army to deal with his people. And as Brother Mujib pointed out, the primary discussion of the first few ayat of today is going to be about Allah's wrath. Right? And so before we actually dive into the ayahs, I just want to give a brief introduction about that topic. And then we'll see how it is illustrated in these ayats. In Islam, in the Quran, we often see a lot of parallelism, a lot of dualities in the created world. Of course, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, and that his existence is unique and alone, and nothing is like him. But as soon as we start speaking about creation, we enter into the world of duality or multiplicity, right? So as soon as we're in the world, right off the bat, you have differentiation occur for the first time. On almost every level of the cosmos, there is some level of differentiation. The most primary form of differentiation that occurs within the cosmos is the manifestation of Allah's will as Jamal and as Jalal. So Allah's commands, his awamir, or his awamir, his commandments, they manifest, his af'al, his actions rather. The actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they manifest as either actions of Jamal or beauty, or we could also tie mercy into that, beauty and mercy, and also on the flip side of Allah's Jalal, his wrath or his majesty. And it's important, I think, especially as adults, especially as people, many of us coming in a way coming back to Islam. You know, we may have been born in Muslim houses, but for many of us, speaking from personal experience, there's some point in our lives where we feel a draw back to Allah, where we feel a heightened sense of religiosity, or we start praying our prayers on time, or we start praying, in the masjid, we start going to the masjid regularly, etc. Or maybe at some point of our lives, maybe when we were children or teenagers, we didn't really feel that pull. And that's especially common in our modern societies, not just in America, but around the world. It's becoming a global phenomenon. And so, just speaking kind of off the cuff here, you kind of find that people come back to Islam for one of two reasons. Just from our kind of noticing these things. You either find that people come to Islam through a kind of intense appreciation or love, or you find that people come to Islam out of fear and out of something that kind of maybe changes their life, right? A life event that they might find traumatic, and so they come back to Islam, or they come back to Allah. And especially in the United States, in the mid-90s and afterwards, when most of us, probably including myself, were just starting to become teenagers or young children, you found that there was a lot of preaching of Islam happening through what they call like hell and brimstone kind of talks, right? Talks focused on punishment, talks focused on Jahannam, talks focused on kind of this fear, instilling fear into the hearts of the people, especially common in Jummah khutbahs or things like that. And then, interestingly enough, in the mid-2000s and after that, you find the opposite kind of happen. So we went from an American kind of Muslim society focused on fear to now we became more about love and acceptance and opening up. And both of these viewpoints are valid. I'm not trying to criticize one viewpoint or another. But one thing I do want to point out is that we as Muslims shouldn't necessarily prefer one over the other. We as Muslims shouldn't necessarily only look for one opinion and not look for the other opinion. There's plenty of people who, for example, they only want to hear about love, but as soon as they start hearing about punishment, right, they turn a blind ear, or they run in the other direction. They say, no, this isn't the Islam that I know, right? Or the opposite is also true. There are plenty of people who are fixated on wrath and punishment, and you have to do this or you're going to go to hell, or all these things. And then when you talk about gentleness, when you talk about mercy, they say, no, this isn't part of Islam. So you see this interesting dichotomy in Muslims, especially, most of us growing up here in America and noticing this, you see a very interesting dichotomy happen. Whereas what the Quran and the Sunnah reinforce is not that one is better than the other, right? Not that you should solely focus on love or that you should solely focus on wrath, but we as servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need to realize that both of these realities are faces of Allah, right? That we live in a world where we will be encountering wrath at certain points in our life, and at other points of our life we will encounter mercy, right? We have to be able to remember Allah in both, right? The Muslim is not the one who only seeks gentleness, and then as soon as things become hard, they run away from the deen, right? That person isn't truly worshipping Allah then, they're worshipping gentleness. They just want comfort. On the other hand, if a person only is fixated on making things difficult and harshness and we have to be strict and all of these things, and then as soon as they see someone being, a bit more lax, and then they start to kind of get angry towards them, right? That's also not part of our deen, right? Generally, they say, for example, the nawafil and the extra sunan that you pray, first and foremost, you need to apply them to yourself before you start mandating other people to do them, because the nawafil and the sunan are a personal choice, right? So we shouldn't exist in a society where we only look at the world through the eyes of jalal, through the eyes of wrath. Neither should we live in a society where we only look at the world through the eyes of jamal, right? Both extremes lead to bad results. On the one extreme, if all we're fixated upon is mercy, you get to the point where the Arabic word is, you reach a state called tamanni, where all you are doing is just, everything's going to be fine. All you're doing is just vainful kind of wishing. You're not really putting any effort in, right? You start neglecting your prayers. You start saying, it's okay. Who cares? Allah's going to forgive me anyway, right? So you neglect your duties on the one extreme. On the other extreme, if there's too much wrath, then a person reaches a state called ya'is, where they become in complete despair, right? So they're, oh my God, Allah's never going to forgive me. Oh, I'm never going to make it to Jannah. Oh, nothing's ever going to go my way. Oh, my prayers are useless. They have, all my prayers are wrong. I need to do everything over again. So they reach the other extreme, where now they can't function either, right? Both extremes are wrong. We need to find a balance in the middle, where with one eye we behold mercy, and with the other eye we behold wrath. And we have to be able to remember Allah in both situations. As Allah points out in several places, that the people of Iman and the people of taqwa are those who remember Allah fis sarra'i wad darra, right? They remember Allah in times of happiness, but they also remember Allah in times of hardship, right? They remember Allah in both. If a person only remembers Allah in happiness and they don't remember Allah in hardship, there's something wrong with their Iman, and vice versa is also true. Okay? Anyway, all that is an introduction to today's topic, because today we are going to be speaking in the first half of these ayats about divine wrath, about divine punishment. And I prefaced all of this discussion with what we just said because I don't want anyone to feel like, oh my God, Islam is all about wrath. No, it's not all about wrath, but we do have to acknowledge that Allah's wrath exists. We do have to acknowledge that Allah's Jalal exists. Just like we also must acknowledge that Allah's Jamal exists as well. We have to have a balanced viewpoint, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, the highest state, or actually, I don't want to say that he said it, but if I remember correctly, it was the Prophet ﷺ. It may not be though, so don't quote me on that. But it's a saying that the highest maqam that a person can reach, the highest state of the awliya, is a state called Hira. Actually, it's called Hira, where they become mutahayyir. And a lot of people think of this hadith or this saying and they get confused, because the word Hira means bewilderment, right? Reaching a state which is called bewilderment. So why is the highest state bewilderment? Well, it's because at the highest state of the awliya, they fully realize the Jamal of Allah, that Allah is so infinitely merciful, and they fully realize that Allah is so infinitely generous, but at the same time they also realize the wrath of Allah. They realize also that Allah is so infinitely vengeful, that Allah is so infinitely just, that every single thing is taken into account, that every single thought that they had is taken into account. Nothing is left out. So they behold, the highest stage is to behold infinite mercy, but also infinite justice, right? And when you get to that stage, what happens? You're bewildered, right? You're mutahayyir. Because in a split second, you see absolute mercy, but you also see absolute justice. It's like seeing black and white at the same time, right? If you try to look at that, if your eye tried to process that, it doesn't work, right? Beholding opposites at the exact same time, what does it do to your mind? It makes you bewildered, right? Try to imagine seeing, for example, something that doesn't work together. Imagine seeing an object that was a square and a circle at the same time. Right? It would lead you to a state of bewilderment. What's happening? Right? Or try seeing an object that is both light, complete light, but also dark at the same time. You become bewildered. You don't know what's happening. Right? And so the Prophet ﷺ, or whoever said this phrase, that this is the highest state. Why? Because in this state, you're in complete balance, right? In this state, you can acknowledge Allah through all of Allah's names, right? Just like you can acknowledge Allah is Al-Kareem, so too can you acknowledge that Allah is Al-Muntaqim, right? He's generous, but He's also vengeful. Just like you can acknowledge that Allah is Dhul Jalali wal sorry, not that one. Al-Mun'im, for example, that Allah gives ni'mah. You acknowledge, on the other hand, that Allah also takes away these things, right? Allah removes ni'mah as well. I don't know the exact opposite. I don't think there's a name like that. But we have mun'im and we have an opposite to it too. Or for example, a better example, just like you acknowledge that Allah is al-muhyi, right? At the same time you acknowledge that Allah is al-mumit. Allah is the one who gives life, but He's also the one who gives death. Right? This is balance. Right? Ultimately, as Allah Himself said in a Hadith Qudsi, ultimately, mercy prevails. Right? But with the condition of us following the guidelines. Ultimately, mercy will prevail. Which is why when we mention the name of Allah in the beginning of our surah or in the beginning of the Quran, we mention Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, right? Because we want to remind ourselves of mercy. We want to have a bit more hope. But that doesn't mean that we leave aside Allah's Jalal. Okay? One of the more kind of reasons I'm mentioning this and going on about it a while, I was at a lecture recently by a famous imam who came to the Washington DC area, and the topic that the imam was talking about was educating our children. And then in the Q&A session after the lecture, someone asked the imam that, "Oh imam, I want to teach my children the Quran. But what about when the Quran talks about Jahannam and it talks about Allah, when Allah destroyed the past people? I don't want to teach this to my child. I don't think it's appropriate for them. What do I do?" Right? And the fact that we even think about questions like this shows how skewed our viewpoints are, right? That we only want to focus showing our children, oh, okay, there's only good in the world. Don't ever think about the bad. No, right? The Quran speaks about both things. The Quran speaks about Jannah, but it also speaks about Jahannam. You have to be aware of both. We can't shelter our children from the Quran. Right? We can't shelter our children from Allah's word. Because there's a wisdom in learning about both sides of the world, about both sides of reality. There's a wisdom in learning about both sides of how Allah interacts with the universe. Allah is not always kind to us. Right? Sometimes Allah puts us through tests. All of us have been through tests. Right? All of us have been through tribulations. All of us have gone through sadness. Right? So we need to know that even in those situations, Allah has not abandoned us. Right? Because if you never speak about how Allah gives these issues, Allah gives us tribulations, then you think that Allah is abandoning you in those situations. He's not. He gave you those trials. He's still with you. Allah is just as present with you in your trials as He is in your ease. Right? But we just don't think about it because we close one of our eyes. Right? We only want to see the good. And of course, even Allah alludes to this in the Quran. Right? Allah talks about this very issue in the Quran. So inshallah, we want to be people of balance. So, in these few ayat, now, as we said, this is kind of a prologue of what happened. I'm sorry, I keep saying the word prologue. And here, after the man who's called Habib al-Najjar has been killed by his people and he's entered into Jannah, Allah tells us what happens. He gave him Jannah and the man was talking about his people. Now Allah summarizes everything. He says in this ayah that we mentioned, we didn't send an army to his people. After they killed him, we didn't have to send an army. Right? We didn't have to combat them and fight them and etc. إِن كَانَتْ إِلَّا صَيْحَةً وَاحِدَةً. All that happened was there was one swift strike, one swift punishment. A sayha is almost like it's also a yell as well. Saha yasihu is to yell, to cry out. Right? All it was one moment, one instant. فَإِذَا هُمْ خَامِدُونَ. And after that, they were khamidun. And khamada, or this verb khumud, is what happens when a candle, you have a candle and you have the light on top of the candle. When the light is extinguished, that's called khamid. Right? So all we had to do for these people was this one strike, one kind of doting out of wrath, one instance of our punishment was enough, and they were snuffed out just like candles. Okay? This is how swift Allah's wrath is. We didn't have to send them an army. We didn't have to fight them. We didn't have to combat them. Right? Who are they compared to Allah? Right? Who are we with our bodies compared to the host of angels? We're nothing, right? Allah doesn't need to fight us. Of course, we make ourselves out to be these grand beings and we think ourselves very important. But at the end of the day, we're nothing next to the power of Allah, right? All it was one sayha, one instance of wrath, one punishment, they were all gone. The entire city and the people were wiped out. And then he continues, Ya hasratan ala al-ibad. Oh, woe to the slaves. Oh, how the ibad, the servants, how they are in loss. Because what happened? Not only did they lose their lives in this dunya, they also lost their lives in the next world. Right? Because of what they did to this one man and killing him, one of their own tribesmen, one of their own clan folk, taking his life because he agreed with the messengers. They lost their worldly life and they also lost their chance at happiness in the next life. Right? Of course, alluding to the fact that their abode in the next life will also be the abode of torment. Right? They'll wind up in Jahannam. So they lost this fleeting life, which they had enjoyed up to this point, right? They had built a town of trade, they had built their homes, they had built their families. You know, one of the things that people are most afraid of is losing their families and their possessions, right? These people were enjoying their life until they did this heinous act. Allah destroyed all of them in an instant, like a candle going out in the wind, right? And they lost this life and they lost the next life. This is what we're talking about when we say Allah's wrath, how swift it is. Right? And this is something, of course, we have to acknowledge. We have to live with this reality. Right? And then Allah continues, again, just to hammer home the point. أَلَمْ يَرَوْا كَمْ أَهْلَكْنَا قَبْلَهُمْ. If these people weren't enough, if it wasn't enough for you to know what happened to the people of Antioch, didn't we also destroy people before them? Don't you look to the past to see what happened to the people before them? They weren't the first people to be wiped out. Right? أَلَمْ يَرَوْا كَمْ أَهْلَكْنَا قَبْلَهُمْ مِنَ الْقُرُونِ أَنَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِمْ لَا يَرْجِعُونَ. And not only does Allah say, yeah, we destroyed a few, it's almost like he's, how many we destroyed? He says, kam. Right? Don't they know how many we destroyed? Right? Don't they know how many we destroyed? And of course, again, we don't want to just look at this from one perspective. Right? Obviously, there's a reason why Allah destroys nations. Right? When a prophet comes to you, prophets are the single strongest focal point of mercy that Allah sends to the entire earth. The greatest blessing is to meet a prophet, bar none. And the greatest blessing of all is to meet the Prophet. This is why the Sahaba are called the best generation. Of all people who ever lived, the Sahaba will be the best. Okay, why is a prophet the greatest blessing of all? Because what is the purpose of a prophet? What is a prophet giving you? The prophet is literally handing you the keys to eternal happiness. The prophet is handing you in your lap the keys to eternal bliss. There's nothing greater than that. Right? As I believe it's Plato said, I think it was Plato, he said, more is owed to your teacher than to your father. Right? More is owed to the teacher than even to the father. Speaking about the life of a student. Why? Because what does a teacher do? Right? A teacher expands your mind. A teacher expands your horizons. A teacher, especially if it's a religious teacher, right? A person who's connected to Allah, a person who's connected to the Quran, they show you the keys to Allah's happiness. Whereas what does the father do? The father gives you your physical body. Of course, father and mother, don't just want to single out the fathers. We should say mother three times. Okay? But your parents that gave you your body, according to Plato, and it's actually echoed by a lot of Islamic scholars, they say more is owed to the teacher than them. And of course, we know that this is true from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, because what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He said, the most beloved thing to you should be what? Allah and His Messenger. More beloved than your parents should be Allah and His Messenger. And in the famous story of you should love your mother 3 times, right? There's a preface to that story that a lot of people miss out. Right? The man actually came and said, oh Allah, what should I love the most? Oh Messenger of Allah, what should I love the most, if I'm remembering it correctly? He said, Allah and His Messenger. They were first. The thing you should have the most love for is Allah and His Messenger. And then your mother. And then your mother, and then your mother 3 times, and then your father. But before the triple mentioning of the mother was Allah and His Messenger. They're first. Right? There's also a famous hadith about Sayyidina Omair radiallahu anhu, in which Sayyidina Omair is speaking to the Prophet ﷺ about his iman, and he said something to the effect of, oh Rasulullah, is my iman complete? Or when will my iman be complete? And the Prophet ﷺ says, when I am more beloved to you than yourself. Right? Or something to that effect. I'm forgetting the exact story. But something like that. Anyway, Sayyidina Umar says, that's basically, he says, that's the one thing I love the most. The one thing that I love the most is my own soul. He said, your iman won't be complete until you love me more than you love your own soul. Why? Why is this the case? Because it's what the prophets bring that you and I are incapable of bringing. Right? The prophets, as we said, if it wasn't for Rasulullah ﷺ, none of us would have a straight, open path to Jannah. It's open to this day. The path is there. The book is here. The Sunnah is there. Right? Anyone in the world, thanks to the mercy of the Prophet ﷺ, anyone in the world to this day can walk that path straight into the doors of Jannah. Right? So this is the greatest blessing. Now imagine if a messenger comes to you, the messenger who manifests the greatest blessing of Allah, and what do you do instead? You kill them. Right? Many of the messengers were killed by their own people. Or you don't kill them, but you kill those willing to follow them. So what you're essentially doing is the greatest mercy, the greatest blessing has come to you, and you're spitting in its face. Right? You're saying, I don't care what Allah wants. I don't care what my Creator wants. Even though your Creator wants to give you eternal happiness, forget it. Right? It's tantamount to shirk. Rejecting the message of Allah, rejecting the message of the Prophet, preferring yourself to that. Right? This is when Allah says people take their own nafs as an ilah. Right? And so Allah tells us how many towns have we destroyed? How many have we destroyed? But why did we destroy them? Because the people of those towns cut down the greatest blessing that ever walked the face of this earth, the prophets of Allah. Okay? There are also many hadiths on this issue that, for example, a false scholar, a scholar who calls to the dunya, the Prophet ﷺ said that they're worse than the highway robbers. Right? In the olden days, the most dangerous thing were highway robbers. When you're taking your caravan, and in your caravan you don't just put your goods, but you have your whole life. Right? Your entire life is connected to this caravan. And when a raiding party would come and they would kill and they would steal, that was the thing that everyone feared the most. But the Prophet ﷺ said that the false scholar, or rather the false scholars, are worse than them. Why? Because these raiders, what do? They take away your worldly goods. Right? But what do the false scholars do? Not only do they take away your worldly goods, but they take away your chance at the goods of the next life. They take away, or they lead you away from the path of bliss in the next life, of happiness in the next life. Right? They guide you towards hell. The false scholars, right? The shaitan. They want you to fall off of the straight path. They want to prevent you from that ultimate happiness. So for these people, Allah has created wrath, punishment. He has shown the way of mercy, and they have closed the doors to it. They deserve His wrath. Right? So Allah mentions, how many have we destroyed? Right? And He says, how many before them, how many villages have we destroyed? How many generations have we destroyed? أَنَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِمْ لَا يَرْجِعُونَ, and they will never come back. Right? They will never come back to them. The people that were destroyed will never come back to us. Right? They're destined for the depths of hell. But to Allah, as He says in the next line, the next ayah, وَإِن كُلٌّ لَمَّا جَمِيعٌ لَدَيْنَا مُحْضَرُونَ. But there is none except that they will be gathered for us. Right? They won't come back to you. Once we destroy a people, you'll never see them again on the face of the earth. Ever. You'll never see even traces of them. You'll see their destroyed ruins. Right? That's one of the things that we see so many places around the world. What do you see? You see ruins of buildings. You see ruins of villages. And Allah tells us, go look at them. Go look at the ruins of the people before you. Right? But where are the people? They'll never return to this earth. But to us, everyone will return. Everyone will be present. And so of course here Allah is reminding us of what? Of the day of judgment. The day of measuring out. The day of recompense. And the day when every single thing that everyone ever did will be presented. Right? Every thought you had, every action you did, it's all being recorded right now. And on that day, those tablets are just going to be submitted. Fulan, such and such a person, here's what they did. Right? Here's what they did. Here's what they did. Right? So anyway, this is something, of course, we have to live with. We have to acknowledge. We have to know that this is part of the reality of the universe. There is such a thing called wrath. There is such a thing called jalal. Of course, we hope and we pray for Allah's mercy, but primarily we want to save ourselves from His wrath. Right? How do we do that? We do that by following the message of the Prophet ﷺ, by following the commandments that Allah has made for us as much as we're able to do so, right? And avoiding what has been prohibited. And by doing that, inshallah, we'll earn a reward on top of a reward, right? not only will we earn the reward of this life, that we'll live inshallah a good life away from harm, but we'll be rewarded in the next life with never-ending eternal bliss in the gardens, right? So it's not like, oh, it's just wrath or you just avoid it. No. Avoid wrath because there's also bliss, right? Allah's giving it away for free. All you have to do, as we said in the previous lines, He's not asking you for money. Allah's not after your goods. Allah's not after your food. Allah's not after your clothing. Allah's not after your money, your gold. No, Allah exists for your own sake. You should recognize His existence. And if you do that, gifts upon gifts upon gifts upon gifts await. But if you don't, we have to acknowledge that there is wrath that awaits as well. Right? Okay. So then Allah says in this line, there are none except that they will be gathered, present before us. Right? And this was one of the big problems that a lot of the people of the past had. How will we become living again after we die? So Allah sets the parable. وَآيَةٌ لَهُمْ. If they have a doubt of this, let's give them a sign. آيَةٌ لَهُمْ الْأَرْضُ الْمَيْتَةِ. The dead earth. You think we can't bring the dead back to life? Look at this. Look at the dead earth. What do we do to the dead earth? أَحْيَيْنَاهَا. We give it life. Right? وَأَخْرَجْنَا مِنْهَا حَبًّا. Not only do we give it life, but we cause it to produce. It produces seeds. فَمِنْهُ يَأْكُلُونَ. Not only that, but you eat from those seeds. Right? You know very well Allah's capabilities and His power. You know very well how He can bring the dead back to life. Just like He does the dead earth. Right? وَجَعَلْنَا فِيهَا جَنَّاتٍ. Not only that, and this is now encouraging us towards goodness, right? Not only that, but from the dead earth, Allah can produce gardens. Right? مِن نَخِيلٍ وَأَعْنَابٍ. Gardens of palm trees, gardens of grapes. Right? Just like Allah will bring us back, so too can He bring us back in the best of states. Don't worry. Right? If you love Allah and you love His Messenger and you follow His commandments and you avoid the prohibitions, Allah will bring you back in the garden of untold beauty. Right? With palm trees, with grapes. وَفَجَّرْنَا فِيهَا مِنَ الْعُيُونِ. And we'll put springs in it too. In your garden you have everything you could ever want. We'll cause springs to gush forth. لِيَأْكُلُوا مِنْ ثَمَرِهِ. And therein they'll eat the fruits of that garden. وَمَا عَمِلَتْهُ أَيْدِيهِمْ. And they'll reap the rewards of what they did in this life. Right? It's interesting, it says they'll eat what they did in this life. Because everything you do in this life will have a reverberation in the next life. Every good deed that you do in this life, every good deed that you do to this day, every smile you make towards your brother, every time you make your siblings laugh, everything beautiful that you do has a beautiful manifestation in the next life that you'll be able to enjoy. Okay? And so for that, then Allah ends, inshallah we'll end our talk with this. Allah says, أَفَلَا يَشْكُرُونَ. Then aren't they thankful? Right? Shouldn't they be thankful then? Yeah. So alhamdulillah, we started with wrath, but we ended with mercy. We started with a reminder of Allah's justice, but we ended with shukr. Right? And this is how we should approach our lives. After every stumbling point in our lives, after every tribulation, know that you have something good to look forward to. Right? If, of course, you recognize Allah in all of these conditions. You recognize Allah in hardship. You recognize Allah in ease. Right? The point is always just to remember Allah. Right? I just want to leave with one final hadith. That a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, basically he was complaining to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, you know, all these commandments, all these things that we have to do, they're really heavy on me. They're really heavy. What should I do? The Prophet ﷺ said, okay, at the bare minimum, right? Of course, this is, not counting. This is, I believe this is at a time that was before everything had been established in the religion. So obviously we have a bare minimum in terms of our 5 daily prayers. We have a bare minimum in terms of our fasting of Ramadan. We have a bare minimum in all these things. But the Prophet ﷺ told this man, okay, if things are getting heavy for you, at the very least, لا يزال لسانك رطبا من ذكر الله. At the very least, keep your tongue moist with remembering Allah. At the very least. Right? And you'll have a good ending. Right? Maybe you can't pray 100 nafil. Maybe you can't read 3 juz a day. Because it is heavy, it takes time. At the very least then, just keep remembering Allah. And this is what we're talking about, remembering Allah in hardship and in ease. The point is just to remember. Right? Allah is not closer or further from you in hardship or in ease. Allah is just as present in both situations. What changes is us. So we just need to keep on remembering Allah in all of our situations. We ask Allah to give us the tawfiq to do that. We ask Allah to forgive all of our sins. And are there any questions before we wrap up? Are there any questions online?
Not online.
No, any questions? We just have time for one because we don't want to delay Maghrib. Came in about 10 minutes ago. So, yes.
Can you repeat? Is it one with money and the other one with guys?
Yes.
How do you spell that?
Ya Hamza Sin.
Yeah.
Maybe the sister could show how to write it.
Yeah, Hamza Sin.
Which means despair.
Okay.
So tamanni is like this vainful wishing, and this is despair. Yeah. 2 extremes that we should avoid. Okay, Jazakallah khairan everybody, and inshallah we'll pray Maghrib in 2 minutes.